Well, hello everybody. Thanks for tuning into our video. This is Pastor Mark from Kennewick First United Methodist Church, and I have some guests with me today that I have asked to come and help us explain a little bit about how we're moving forward as a church through the various phases and the plans that are happening from both the government and from our denomination and a local plan that we have. And so I wanted to be able to kind of interview each of the people that are here to talk about how we came about making this plan and how this plan is going to work and kind of look like for us in the next couple of months. So I don't think you can see the names. Well, maybe you can if I move my cursor. So Michelle Hare and Davey Hare are here. Davey works with our facilities team, and Michelle works with our SPMT, our staff group. And then we've got Rich Nelson, who's here, and he's helps with our finance team. And then we've got Dana Bryson. Dana's here because Dana works also with our conference on emergency preparedness stuff, and he's been just a great asset for us for helping just plan for emergency preparedness and things like that. And then also we've got Jill Berg here, and Jill's the chair of our leadership council. So first of all, what I want to just start our conversation with is by letting you all know what has been required of us and what we've been asked to do by our bishop and our conference. Way back in March, we were given kind of the inklings of a plan that our conference in the United Methodist Church was putting together. And when that plan finally came out about how we were going to progress to the part of reopening, one of the things that our bishop's office asked us to do is, as the conference gave us a plan of how they would like us to move forward, they wanted us to provide a plan of how we were going to follow those stages and how we were going to proceed through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. And so we've been working really hard. We meet almost every week to put together that plan to make sure each of those jobs that need to get done are assigned to somebody or assigned to a group so that we can start to plan for the future when we start to move ahead in that plan from stage to stage. And so the conference has required us to do that. I'm going to brag just a little bit. Davey does a great job of preparing those plans for a living. And when we submitted our plan, it got passed around to each of the district superintendents as the gold standard for what a plan should look like. So I'm going to brag on Davey and on our emergency planning team. They did a wonderful job. I've got several emails from other churches around the conference saying, can we see your plan? Because we need help with ours. And I have to admit, my first reaction was like, no, you can't cheat off our paper. But I realized that we're doing something different. So I was happy to share our plan with other people. But so we've submitted that plan. And so I wanted to invite these friends here to help us kind of walk through that. So first of all, I'm going to just kind of hand it over to Jill and ask Jill to give us a little bit of a background about the things that we looked at as we began to put together this plan and what were kind of the priorities that we had around building this plan. So Jill, go ahead and tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. You know, back in early mid-March when the governor gave us our stay-at-home order for this new pandemic, probably a week or two later, we pulled together, Mark suggested pulling together an emergency planning team, which included our leadership council, our staff, and a couple key ministry leads between missions and worship team leads to come together and really talk about what our emergency response would be to this. A little before the conference had provided their guidelines for us, we had been talking about what we felt and how we thought we'd approach this. And there were a couple key things that we really took to heart. And the first one that's very important to us was to do no harm. And at the same time, how do we love our neighbors? And so those were guiding principles for us as we looked at how we managed this closure for our church and how we addressed kind of our key essential services that we provide. And those were, some of the main points that we looked at. Dave and Dana are going to talk a little bit more about the details and the different plans that come from both the county, the plan we've created and our conference. So pass it to them.
So we're working basically under our church plan that Davey led the effort on, and that recognizes the Reimagining Life Together plan that the bishop blessed off for the Greater Northwest Episcopal area, and it also recognizes the state's plan. And everything has to come together for us to proceed to the next phase. So for our county, for our state, meeting the criteria in the bishop's plan, as well as meeting the criteria in our plan. And so out of an abundance of caution, we are taking a safe, steady path to reopening. And Davey, you want to talk more about that path?
Yeah, thanks, Dana. So the plan that we developed is based primarily on the Reimagining Life Together document that was put out by the conference, which is based loosely on the state plan through the phases of reopening. Our plan is a little bit unique because it addresses the very specific needs of our church and the specific missions that we do within our church, while also recognizing the strategic priorities of the state, local, and conference organizations. Our plan is designed to be a pull-apart plan, essentially. So we can take a look at phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, etc. And as more information becomes available, we can adjust our plan according to whatever phase we're in at that time, without having to redo the entire document. Some of the things that are noted in our plan are essentially decisions that were handed down to us. Those are decisions that we didn't have an opportunity to make. Social distancing, maximum allowable gathering, et cetera, are all things that are very specific in our plan that were handed down to us. We also added enough flexibility in our plan so that we could address those very specific needs of our church. So as you take a look at it, we address phase 1. Phase 1 and phase 2 are kind of where we're working right now as an emergency planning team. Phase 1 obviously is the most limiting part of that. And the highlights of phase 1 essentially are that the church and the office are closed to the public. That's by state, local, and conference designations. Maximum allowable people to gather together are 5 at any one instance, and social distancing and public and personal protective equipment are required. We go into those in greater detail in our plan. The phase 2, if we ever get there, would be, well, not if we ever get there, when we get there, would be handed to us either through state, local government, and conference approval before we would be moving to a phase 2 posture in our plan. Essentially looks the same as phase 1. We do begin to loosen up some of our maximum occupancies in our spaces. We begin to open up a little bit more on some of our missions, but we are still required to maintain social distancing, public protective equipment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So
Jill, real quick, I think Jill wanted to add something real quick.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and talk about, as we wrote these plans, we were looking at kind of the 4 key components that we joined together in church for: worship, service, growth, spiritual growth, and fellowship. And in these phases, we've considered each one of those. And as you know, we've considered worship and fellowship and spiritual growth to be all virtual right now because we are in that phase 1 phase. What we did view as essential was a piece of our mission service, and that is Soul Soup, as we provide meals for the homeless. And we, as an emergency team, laid out some pretty strict guidelines on how to manage, along with following the county and state guidelines for food service. to continue to be able to provide meals for our Soul Soup participants throughout this whole time, which is really excellent. And I'll just pass back to Dave, just that we did consider those 4 components as we wrote each plan, or each phase of the plan addresses them.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jill. So as Jill mentioned, where we have implementation flexibility is within those 4 key components that Jill mentioned of our vision of our ministries. We have addressed those things in each one of the phases very specifically as to what we can and can't do. Also recognizing that the future may hold some changes and we'll be able to adapt to them as we need to. Some of the things that you're going to see right off the bat, obviously, is our social distancing, our public and personal protective equipment requirements, our maximum gathering sizes. But we're going to begin to isolate some areas in the church, primarily due to costs for decontamination and making sure that we don't have a potential spread of any virus or whatever. So that's going to be happening, probably in the next couple of weeks. You'll see some signage and some posters that are required both locally and by the conference that talk very specifically about the COVID-19 and how we can both personally and organizationally address the needs of that situation. And then lastly, one of the things that we've been talking about quite a while in our safety and security team, and dovetails very nicely into some of the requirements that are being pushed is kind of a loose term, but is being required of us, encouraged, thanks, hon. Encouraged is our ability to track and trace for any potential COVID situation. The security team for about the last 6 months has been developing and working through a facilities use permit or a facilities use form. And one of the things that we're going to ask is, as we begin to move through the phases, is that each one of our organizations within the church and those organizations that are outside of the church that use our facility complete that form so that we can schedule and we have an idea of when they're going to be there and what spaces they're going to be using within the church so that we can adapt our cleaning and sanitizing needs to those. So some of those groups would include our Narcotics Anonymous group, obviously, the Boy Scouts, obviously, but also our internal groups like the United Methodist Women, the facilities team, the security team, and we just want to be able to schedule because our space will be limited as we begin to move through the phases. Obviously, it'll open up, but we want to also know where you're meeting, when you're meeting, so that we can schedule our cleaning and sanitation around that.
I think that'll be kind of a big change for us because, we've been kind of used, like if we want to do a Bible study, we just head over to the church and do a Bible study, right? But, and so many of us have keys to the building too. You find somebody with a key and you go over and find a classroom and start it. But I think that's really important for us to remember that we're going to really need to be faithful in that of scheduling buildings and use of the building and things like that. First of all, just to keep us in compliance, but also to make sure everybody's safe so that we can get things cleaned. And, the last thing we want is to, have a group that we didn't know was meeting or something, and then find out that, a room got infected and we didn't know about it or things like that. And so that'll be a big change for us. And it'll take a little bit more planning, I think, for us. But I think in the long run, it's a good way for us to make sure that we love each other and do no harm for each other. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dana, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I just want to point out that Davey's been really busy and active in the church looking and tracking through what these activities are going to entail and what is necessary in order to make them safe, and then brainstorming with us on this. So when you see a requirement, it's been well thought out as to why it's there. So I would encourage you to, you know, pay attention to these new requirements. It's going to be different, but there is a reason for everything we put down.
And I might also add too that, I've got a few questions from people, asking how, why are we in stage 1 when other places are in stage 2 or things like that. And part of the reason for that is because we're working with these 3 plans that all need to dovetail together. And so we may find ourselves in positions where, like we are right now, where we've got the bishops okay to move to stage 2. We have a plan in place to move to stage 2, but Benton and Franklin counties are still in stage 1. And so even though everything is set to move to stage 2, we're still going to stay in stage 1 as just an abundance of caution to make sure. And there have been some loosening of some things by the governor for religious service and things like that. But trying to get all of those plans together doesn't mean that when you hear one of the 3 plans is moving, it doesn't mean that we're all moving all together. And so we'll try to do our best to make sure everybody's informed about how that process moves forward, and we get moving there. But yeah, we don't necessarily move as a block very easily. So great. So yeah, we've talked a little bit about those essential ministries of worship and service, our spiritual growth, and our fellowship ministries, and how we'll be doing that. I also just really quickly add too, right now we're in between stage 1 and stage 2. We won't be seeing any changes in worship and things like that until we get to stage 3. We all been kind of joking if we get to stage 3, but it might be a while before we get to stage 3, before we start to have some limited gatherings at the church. So that's a little bit further down the road. But one of the things that when we do get there is that we really need to try to work together as we move through these phases, and as we start to kind of live life together at the church. And so I wanted to invite Michelle to just give us a little bit of information about that and some thoughts about that.
So right now you might be asking yourself, well, what can I do to help?
Mm-hmm.
And so from a staffing perspective, I'd really like you to please pull out your kindness, your communication, and your planning. As we work with the staff, our staff, some of them are working from home and some of them are coming into the office. However, we're in phase 1 right now, and even in phase 2, the office will not be open generally. We ask that you call the office if you have a very essential need to stop by to make an appointment, so that you're planned for. We also ask, as Mark or someone mentioned earlier, everyone has a key to the church. Please don't be stopping by the church and using that key out of convenience because it's something you've always done. Please rethink that. Because as we've mentioned, because of the sanitizing and the necessary of doing the wipe downs and the walk downs and so forth, we want to make sure that the people that are in there using the church for essential ministries like Soul Soup, etc., are walking into a clean and sanitized space. And then also, as you know, and you've been hearing this in many of our communications that have been going out, and when I say many of our communications, I mean many of Mark's communications, but we're going to expect ourselves and our brothers and sisters to wear masks and respect that also when we stop by and we see our staff. So please start preparing yourself for that, because the expectation is that out of an abundance of caution, we want to make sure to make this as safe as possible and to do no harm, and totally respect, all of our friends. And I miss you guys so much, and we all want to be together, but we want to do that in a way that we can walk away safely and go back to our families and be healthy.
Right.
So please consider that. The church office right now is operating under, summer hours. So you can call between 8 and 12. You can get a hold of someone, no problem. And they miss people too. So we are certainly looking forward to the time when we can have an opportunity to get together more. Now, in phase 1, as Dave mentioned, gatherings of 5 or less, if it's essential and necessary for maintenance and operations, or very key decision making, are allowed. When we get into phase 2, gatherings of 10 or less are allowed. And so that's when we'll move into using the forms. And again, I ask for your kindness and your understanding. because our expectation fully is that each group will fill out the form and work with the staff in the office to get those scheduled up so that we can make sure that we're communicating effectively with custodians, cleaning, and the other people using the church or the facilities to make sure that we're leaving it as clean as we found it and safe for the next groups coming in. Also, the expectation is in phase 2 that those are for essential groups. So we will not be allowing any group of 10 to meet, but it will need to be for essential services or essential reasons. And so we're going to be very cautious as we dip our toe back into the water. And please understand as we do that and we work to make sure that we have our arms around that, we can do that well.
And I would just add too that when we first started moving a lot of our groups to virtual meetings and worship to virtual meetings and stuff, I know that technology terrified some of us. And so there was a lot of groups that said, oh, well, we'll just wait it out until we can meet again, thinking that it would be a month or two and not maybe 6 months. So I really want to encourage you that if you're part of a group that would like to meet virtually, we at the church have an account so that we can do Zoom meetings like you're seeing right here. It is a skill that you kind of need to learn a little bit about to be able to use it, but it's not difficult. And now that a lot of us have been using it for a while, it's a little bit less intimidating. And so just, give the church office a call. If you'd like to schedule a meeting, a Bible study meeting, or, something that we normally did on the church grounds, not even thinking about it, just go over and find a room and meet together. We can help you set up those virtual meetings to help you do that. And I know for a lot of us, it's a little bit less intimidating than it was 3 months ago. Yeah, Jill.
And I would also add that just please recognize your own risk. As we reopen, we encourage you to be aware of your own risk for being more vulnerable to catching this coronavirus. And please continue to worship online with us at home. The other thing is to self-monitor and be aware if you're not feeling well, to please don't come to church. Even with a mask, it's best to stay at home and again, worship with us online. As we reopen, we are intending to continue that online option so that we can reach out to our more vulnerable people who are still worshiping with us at home.
Right, yeah, it's important for us, I think, to remember there are things that we do that we can accept a risk for ourselves. But also, it's not just a risk for ourselves, it's a risk for other people as we start to gather back together. And so I just want us to make sure that we realize that too, that there may be some things that we're willing to risk, but I don't want to have us in a place where we could potentially be putting other people at risk as well. So great. Well, and so I get probably at least once, well, not once a day, probably 3 times a week, emails asking or phone calls asking. So Mark, how are we doing financially? Are we making it? Are we going to be okay? And so I am a pastor. I'm not a banker or a financial person. I can kind of balance my checkbook most of the time. So I have programs on my computer that do that. So, but Rich is the one who helps with our finance team and does a lot of that work and oversight for us. So I just want to invite Rich to kind of give us a bit of an update about finances and how we can continue to support the church and things like that. So what do you got for us, Rich?
Thank you, Pastor. As most of you heard, Michelle, that we are actually keeping our staff working through this entire pandemic. And so we are supporting our staff and making sure that they are able to take care of their families and so forth through all of this. So we are incurring some costs, but we are also cutting back on some programs and not spending any money where we don't have to. But I really want to thank the congregation because you really supported us very well. Even though we don't have an offering plate to pass by you each Sunday morning, you are supporting us with your checks, with your online giving, with texting. And so therefore we are managing just fine in that regard. And I really do appreciate that. I guess that's about all I really need to say. And we're about out of time.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, well, yeah, thanks for that. And so, yeah, I was just sharing with them before, you know, the pastor's always leery of saying, yeah, everything's great financially, because then people stop giving, right? But I just want to personally, as your pastor, just say how much I have appreciated serving here for, boy, coming up on my finishing my first year. If anybody had asked me that if my first year would look like this, I would have said you're crazy. And I've never been a pastor in a pandemic before. You all have never probably been parishioners in a pandemic before. So so I just want to thank you all for the support, for the work that we've all done as a church to be a church that loves each other and loves this community. So thank you for doing that. You've made my job much easier. And I haven't pulled out most of my hair yet. I'm doing pretty okay there. So, and I want to thank you all for being part of this call and part of this interview and letting us know how things are going to proceed forward. I'm going to try to do some more of these interviews. We're going to try to get to people who are putting together our worship services when we get to the place of moving into phase 3, so we can get an idea of what that looks like. And also, I know some of you are asking about the plan specifically. If you would like to have a copy of the plan, go ahead and either shoot us an email at the church or give us a call, and we can make sure that you get a copy of that plan. It's 43 pages, 44. Sorry, that one page was important. So it's 44 pages long, so we're a little hesitant to put something that huge on our webpage, just kind of for public downloads and things like that. But if you would like to have a copy of the plan, feel free to contact us, and we can make sure that you get a copy of it if you need it. So anyway, that's what we wanted to share with you today. All hearts are clear? Anything else you want to add? Anybody in our little boxes? All right, we'll call our Brady Bunch meeting to an end then. So thanks, everybody. And we will, remember, you can tune into church through our YouTube channel at 10:30, and we'll keep trying to keep you as informed as we possibly can. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Okay, how do I stop recording?